If you've ever stared at a pile of cables and a half-finished mix and thought, I don't want to spend another $100 on gear that just sits in the corner, you're not alone. It's a real worry, especially when you're juggling a home studio, a podcast, or a small band recording session. You want something that actually works for you, not a fancy box that ends up collecting dust. I went down the rabbit hole, read through the handful of reviews, compared specs, and tried to imagine the day-to-day workflow before hitting record. The link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. So, let's talk about the TASCAM Model 24 mixer paired with the TH02B closed-back headphones. At first glance, it looks like a classic all-in-one solution, a 24-channel analog mixer that doubles as a USB audio interface, plus a pair of studio headphones that promise clean sound and a solid bass response. The idea is appealing for anyone who wants to record, mix, and monitor without juggling multiple boxes. But does it truly deliver on that promise for real-world creators? Who should consider this bundle? If you're a home recording enthusiast who already has a decent computer setup, a few microphones, and maybe a couple of instruments, the Model 24 can become the hub of your workflow. Its 16 high-grade preamps are a nice upgrade over many entry-level mixers, and the multiple stereo line inputs mean you can plug in keyboards, drum machines, or even a second laptop without constantly rerouting cables. For podcasters who need a simple way to manage multiple speakers and still grab a clean stereo feed for post-production, the built-in USB audio interface is a solid time-saver. The included TH02B headphones are closed back, which makes them practical for tracking in a less-than-perfect room because they help isolate the sound you're recording from what you're hearing. Now, who might want to skip it? If you're chasing a fully digital workflow with no analog knobs, or you already own a dedicated audio interface with higher resolution converters, the Model 24 could feel redundant. Likewise, if you plan to record primarily in stereo and need only a few inputs, a compact audio interface might be more cost-effective. The headphones, while decent, are not the kind of high-end reference monitors you'd use for mastering. They're more suited for tracking and rough mixes. Let's break down the practical strengths. First, the mixer's layout is deliberately familiar. EQ and auxiliary knobs are placed exactly where you'd expect them from classic analog desks. That means you can start tweaking a vocal's mids or sending a guitar to an external effect without hunting through menus. The 16 mic preamps are a standout for this price tier. They're low noise and retain enough headroom that you can record a drum kit or an acoustic guitar without the hiss that sometimes plagues cheaper units. The USB connection is a two-way street. You can send the entire mix to your computer at 24-bit/48 kHz, and you can also bring your DAW playback straight back into the mixer for Hanson fader control, a workflow that many home engineers find surprisingly smooth. From a day-to-day perspective, the foldable design of the mixer makes it easier to fit into a crowded home studio or to take it to a rehearsal space. You'll find that the transport clamps and the way the chassis folds are sturdy enough that you can set it up, tear it down, and move it a few times a week without worrying about loose screws. The headphones, being closed back, do a good job of sealing off external noise, which is a blessing if your room isn't acoustically treated. Their bass response is rich enough that you'll hear the low end of a kick drum or a bass guitar, which helps you make more informed mixing decisions while tracking. On the flip side, there are a few hidden trade-offs. The mixer's analog path, while pleasant to the ear, doesn't offer the same level of digital precision you'd get from a dedicated audio interface with high-resolution AD/DA converters. If you're planning on high-fidelity recordings for an EP you intend to push to streaming platforms, you might notice a slight difference compared to an interface that touts 24-bit/192 kHz conversion. Also, the built-in USB limits you to a sample rate of 48 kHz, which is fine for most podcasts and demos, but it could be a bottleneck if you're aiming for higher resolution sessions. Another practical consideration is the headphone comfort over long sessions. The TH02B's ear pads are plush, but after a couple of hours they can become warm, especially in a room that isn't climate-controlled. They're not a replacement for a full-size open-back pair if you spend days mixing tracks. Finally, While the mixer's 24-channel capability sounds expansive, the actual number of line inputs you'll use on a typical home project is usually far lower. That means you might be paying for capacity you never fully utilize, which is something to keep in mind when weighing the overall cost. So, where does the value actually come from? If you're looking for a single piece of gear that can replace a separate analog mixer, an audio interface,